So I think this is going to be a neat project to watch. This is the lead nut to the longitudinal axis of our Kearns-Richards horizontal boring machine that I was running at work. This is actually our smallest machine out of three. And just for curiosity's sakes, here is the larger of our three horizontal boring machines. And this is the one I usually run. Here's a pic of the old nut and the new nut side by side. And this video is going to be of how I made this new nut. So I started off what I believe was an 8-inch diameter by 15-inch long piece of bronze material. And I chucked this up in our vertical lathe and I started plunging the side of it as I'm trying to keep a flange maintained here. As we go through, I'll explain why I want this flange. Once I plunged enough away to get a turning tool in there, I started turning the bottom portion down to the outside diameter that I'm going to need. So once I got it roughed out to diameter as close to the jaw as I could get, I flipped it over, re-chucked it up, dialed it in, and with my toe clamps, I used that flange to clamp it down flat to the work table. Once I had it all roughed in, I started with the drilling process and I drilled most of the way through on one end, and then I flipped it over and went in the other side, and we met in the middle eventually. Now I need to get this mounted to the dividing head. So I removed the chuck and found the bolt pattern and a locating spigot on the face. So I brought the part over to the lathe and I bored out the mating spigot onto our workpiece. Then I brought it over to our Nicholas Korea milling machine. Here's a photo from when we were moving it. And I started drilling that bolt pattern into the flange. This is an early 80s machine. It uses Heidenhain CNC controls. I'm pretty sure only us old guys know how to use that stuff nowadays. I whipped up a quick drilling and tapping program. Now I'm going to run this tap through those holes that I just drilled. And there's our face flange, locating spigot, and 4 drilled and tapped holes. So we can mount this thing directly to the dividing head. I got a lot of work to do on this thing. Now that it's on a dividing head, I can go in there and start roughing this thing down to its shapes. I made a lot of little programs for this job. It was a lot of fun. Here's a couple of progress pics. For the radius, on one side I did 5-degree increments, and on the opposing side I did 10-degree increments. This got our piece looking really damn close to the original nut, which would have been a cast workpiece. Then I got it on some work blocks, all dialed up and squared, and I started doing detail work on the flange. We got holes for the mounting, holes for dowels, we got a locating step, and some oiling holes. There was a bit of work to go into this piece. And here's our progress up against the original nut. And as you can see, I got it looking pretty close. Now technically our next operation is to finish the bore and thread this piece, but I gotta make a go no-go gauge first. This way here, when I cut the threads in my lead nut, I can use this to make sure that it actually fits in there correctly. threading went smooth, and as you can see, it came out looking good. Now, we don't really work on small stuff here, so we didn't actually have a boring bar small enough to bore and thread this piece. So I even had to make the boring bar to do the boring and the threading. I did the turning at work, but I actually brought the bar home, and on my horizontal boring mill, I milled the slot in the end to hold the tool, and then munched some material at the top to make a flat spot for the grub screws we're going to put in. And then over on my Bridgeport, I drilled and tapped for the screws. Now I'm ready to finish the bore and thread this thing. And as you can see, once again, this flange came out very helpful. I used it to grab in the jaws, and then using toe clamps, I clamped that flange right to the face of the chuck. This is going to keep it in there nice and sturdy. The lathe I'm using is a 30-inch heavy-duty Mazak lathe. Mazaks are by far my favorite lathes to run. Now, before I could actually go in there and cut the threads, I had one more challenge, and I had to grind down a high-speed steel blank to the Acme thread profile that I needed, because we didn't have anything like this in the shop either. No big deal, more entertainment on my behalf. Other than just a little bit of chatter and vibration, the threading portion went just fine. I'm very experienced in threading and actually turn a lot of threads here. Once the lathe ops were done, I brought this piece over to the bandsaw, chopped off our flange, and cleaned up the end in the milling machine. And there we go. Here's the new nut alongside of the original. There's our go, no-go gauge. Here's yours truly, taking pride in his work. And here's a good look at our finished product. Nice and shiny. I'm actually really happy with the way this turned out. Now, I typically worked afternoons, and quite often I'm the only machinist in the building. So instead of wandering around looking for my second, I just engaged the power feed, walked around the back, pushed the nut onto the screw with my knee, and like a typical dude, I stood there in amazement and watched this thing thread on. The machine broke down with a job on it. It took me a couple hours to remove the job and get it out of the building, out of our way. It took me most of the shift to figure out how to remove this lead nut from the machine. It took 8 shifts to make said lead nut. And it took me about a half a shift to put the machine back together, and another half shift to put my workpiece back on. Now that the machine's back up and running, I was able to get my setup all mounted and my workpiece back on. This is a 28-foot long log debarker roll. We have this spanned across the shop to the medium-sized boring mill for support. It's a pretty simple job. My work involves facing the ends down to length, and that's an 8-inch diameter bore in there, about 24 inches long, that I got to bore out as well. So that's basically it for this project and this video. It was a lot of fun making it, and it was quite entertaining putting all these pictures and videos together to make this video. And as usual, thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.